From the realms of Middle-earth to the shores of the Undying Lands, this is Casterly Talk, and we are here to look at Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Amazon Prime's new show. The first 2 episodes dropped last night, and for us at least, it could be 2 a.m. wherever you are. We're going to have a lot of fun diving in. This is going to be a lot of fun because for me, Ken Napzok, it's familiar territory that I don't necessarily always know my way around, so I'm watching it a little differently, which means I need help. I need a fellowship. And we've got one today, Alden Diaz and Rachel Cushing Levine. I'm trying not to call you Crusher because that's another life. It's another life.
A different age.
Yeah. Which is one of the themes. We are going to get into these episodes today. Episode 1, A Shadow of the Past, directed by J.A. Bayona, and writers J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, who are also the showrunners. That word gets thrown around a lot, and it's a real title and position of power and responsibility, but we are in a showrunner culture where we obsessed with those at the top of the show. There's also a bunch of writers and everyone else involved. Episode 2 was Adrift. Again, J.A. Bayona directing it, and Jennifer Hutchinson, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, among other things, the writer of this episode. We are going to get into a lot of stuff, the themes. We normally do that, the big moments, and we got some other stuff to discuss. And yes, lore will come into play. And I did want to just say up top, Tolkien is this legendary writer, without a doubt, right? That's why we're here. And this show is both exploring, celebrating, but also trying to do new things with that world because they kind of have to at times, and maybe because they want to. We're going to discuss all that stuff here. Lore will factor into it. One thing we want to say up top, the gatekeeping that sometimes lore can be is not something we're here for, and you're going to hear a lot of it. Rachel's got some great, wonderful thoughts and questions about the lore. So we'll set that up top. Also, the idea of the diversity of the cast. If that's a problem with you, this might not be the vodcast, or even the show for you to watch. We are here to celebrate this wonderful cast and crew. And also, there's this thing up top, and I apologize for monologuing up top, but we are here on Casterly Talk. It's a Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, House of Dragon podcast, and I wanted to do Rings of Power because I love this world. I love Lord of the Rings. I love those movies. Yeah, I heard they made some books of them. We were here. We want to take a look at this show. We're never here to compare the shows. Occasionally, you might make a reference each show. But for me, this competition that a lot of people are putting the shows in against the wills of anyone involved with the shows, by the way, is pointless. It's like comparing pancakes to an omelet. They're both on the breakfast menu. We are just going to enjoy breakfast. All right? Or maybe you throw a French toast in there as well. Second breakfast. Oh, I get that reference. I really do. Rachel, Alden and I really do want to start with you. We're all recording this on our own time schedules today, so we might not have a super long show today, even though this is 2 wonderfully long episodes, over 2 hours of content. But Rachel, we do need to start with you. You are, and I say this with affection towards you, a Tolkien lore head. That can sometimes be an insult, or sometimes I throw it like a fast football. But you love this world. You know this world. You are like many, many, many people who've lived with this property for a long time. This show is both something you've been excited for, and also, I don't know, curious at best, dubious at worst about what they can do. I want to pitch it to you first after these first 2 episodes. How you feeling? Big questions. What are your thoughts?
It's a big mix of emotions still, about a day after having seen them. But the bottom line for me is that I have to come at the show. Well, I inevitably come at this show from 2 different perspectives. One, as the lore head, as a person who doesn't have a memory in her life that doesn't include Tolkien. My parents were reading these books to me and my sister when we were very young. I've grown up with them. My family has about 15 Lord of the Rings and Tolkien related tattoos between the 4 of us. You've all seen me cosplay as Lady Galadriel. So this has been a huge part of my life. It's my favorite books. They're some of my favorite films. This is coming from a very, very personal place to see another story from Tolkien's beautiful, beautiful, fantastical brain be brought to us. At the same time, I want to, especially on these shows when I talk to you guys, come at it from the perspective of just what is it that we watched and did it work in and of itself? So I'm going to attempt to balance that. Good luck to me. Won't always be easy, because it's just such a mix. And then, not because we want to make it more complicated, we have the monkey wrench of what this show was allowed to include. Yeah. So many people have talked about what the Tolkien estate has agreed to allow the showrunners to include and what they can't include. There's a lot of pieces that I feel are missing, but it might be because they are not allowed to include them. And so they're trying to find their ways around that. At the end of the day, what the estate granted the rights to was a handful of pages in the appendices from Lord of the Rings. They do not have the rights to the Silmarillion. So that complicated, I'm sure, what they were doing. And for me, knowing those works so well and knowing these characters, several of these characters so well, there were some jarring moments of that's very different than what was going on in the books. The books are vague, and that's also a piece of it. They're able to fill in. And I think that's what drew them to doing this show too, is that we have bullet points. We have these things happen in the Second Age. These characters are involved. Obviously, many other people were involved. Obviously, there were smaller moments that led to these big moments. And that's what these creators are filling in. And they did have a mandate that they could not contradict anything that Tolkien wrote, in a sense. So it's not so, we're not going to see Galadriel or Elrond die in any of these seasons because we know they exist 3,000 years later in The Lord of the Rings. And certain other things will also, have to be adhered to. But it's a large sandbox. And coming out of the gate with these first 2 episodes, I'd say I liked a lot of it, loved a couple things, and a few things left me with some questions. So,
no, it's a great start. No, and I think you probably represent a lot of fans in this world. And yes, again, here's one reference to it: going looking across the Song of Ice and Fire. Sometimes when it's not a case of too much. You're just in this world, and you can either fill in the blanks of this is what that means, or hey, where is that? And I think this is such a show that was highly anticipated, but absolutely. Right from the beginning, you hear a beloved tale. It's going to get some sort of adaptation, and that can go horribly wrong. And you can have a lot of questions. And I think I think you're coming from a very honest spot that's probably shared by a lot of people. I'm on this other side of like, all right, cool. I know those movies more than anything else in this world. Have some questions myself, but it's more of those. Let me dig into a wiki and find out, and kind of take the show in a different way. And I think we need to have that balance when discussing it there. So I think I don't know, Alden. I won't speak for you. Maybe you want everything to the letter of the law here, but that's one.
Yeah, frankly, not including Ungoliant the Giant Spider show that they don't care. In my opinion, they don't care. It's another 2 guys with no experience ruining a lore. It's a pair of white dudes writing, and I'm done with it. No, I think that everything you said, Rachel, is so. I think not only like important, but just I think relevant specifically in a weird way to the text, to the scripts rather, not the text, but to the show. Like you have Galadriel in this, and we'll get to her later, of course, but talking about, well, you're all saying this, but what about what's in here? You're just going to let me carry it? And she's having that battle about what she knows that no one else knows. And so are you, which is an interesting thing that we all are faced with that. I grew up a huge reader of like Marvel comics, and I went into Iron Man knowing Iron Man as a kid, backwards and forwards, Marvel encyclopedias that I would carry to school and all that stuff. And suddenly you're like, oh, they're doing this. And it just sort of forces you to get on board or not. And you can choose, by the way, you can choose or not with zero malice, which I think is another thing that people on the internet forget, is that you can say, I wish it was the way that I remember, not for me, and just move on with your life. But at the same time, a lot of people aren't going to choose to do that. So I think it's important to have these conversations. I'm more so experience-wise in your camp, Ken, of I came up on these as films. And then in The Hobbit, when I was more in high school and everything, read The Hobbit as a child, read The Lord of the Rings probably in middle school. I think attempted the Silmarillion in 8th grade, and then was like, this is like church. And then just didn't go back to it for a while, but I probably will now. But I was, I mean, I was moved by a lot of this. It just made me feel really warm. It's doing that legal dance, like we've talked about. We talked a little bit off air of like, we can have this character, but maybe we just don't say his name. Which, if you're a Star Wars fan, you're used to that. You're used to people being named way after the fact in toys and in text. But there are things that
they're called Ewoks, apparently.
Exactly. His name was not Hammerhead; it was Momo Nadon. But there was a similar cinematic language, a similar visual language. It has it has a foot in the same realm of that art that would inform Jackson's 6 films and is informing this. When you see the glimpse of Sauron, you're like, that's in the exact same design spirit. It's not legally actionable, but it is in the exact same design spirit. He's just larger than life, and they took a lot of that where this Gil-galad feels like a Peter Jackson character, and there are things like that I think we're going to throw a lot of new at you, but we're also going to come for you. There's tons of people online right now saying that are movie fans saying, I feel like I'm back, which is a very, I think, big achievement considering how daunting this was.
Daunting indeed. We're going to dive into some stuff here. I do want to look at, before anything, we're going to obviously do our big dive. So I want to talk about the look, the feel, the vibes, those kind of things. Rachel, we'll get to that in a second. But episode 1, I'm not going to do a full summary of what we got going on here, but I just look at it thematically as a season of change is upon you. A season of change is upon us. This is this transition from the first to second age. Again, not going down to the minutia, down to the details, but in general. And this big question of what do you bring with you? What parts of the past do you let go? Change, a big thing going on here. And then episode 2, I just kind of looked as literally adrift in a sea of change. And a lot more. We're going to talk about the cultural exchanges, also the distancing of the cultures, which comes up a lot in especially the second episode. But I think they've done a great job with all that. And the battle of good versus evil. That's key. That's key to these stories. We love those big myths. But Rachel, looking at you, talking about the look, the feel, the vibes, the music, Bear McCreary, Howard Shore. We got a lot of stuff going on there. Take me through your thoughts on just the overall feel and look of the show.
Yeah, I mean, as many people have already said, the money's on the screen. They spared no expense on making sure that the set design and the production and the special effects were cinematic for a television show. And I can't say I've ever seen anything quite to this level on a television show, which is definitely a testament to all of the artists involved in bringing the world back to life for us. Costumes were great, a lot of great homages to Lord of the Rings, but again, trying to be its own thing. It's like all kinds of prequels and sequels that exist, putting your own stamp on it, but making sure it all feels part of the same world. They have a little more leeway in this because it is 3,000 years prior to the events. So I'm sorry, I can't give credit, but I did read a quote or a tweet or something somewhere that was like, that's like comparing our modern day age with like Rome. So, these are very, very largely separated periods. So within that, you can do very different things. And I have heard a lot of like kind of grumbling of like, how is this Galadriel going to become the Galadriel that we know in The Lord of the Rings, who is definitely not a physical warrior, is definitely not, part of the fellowship at the forefront of going up against Sauron, who she states in this show is her, number one revenge focus, to the detriment of all else. To which I basically say, 3,000 years, a lot will happen. And I think the idea that they're going for here is to take this character and say, we'll get her there. This is the story of how she gets there. And I'm intrigued by that. I think some of the writing was tough. I think spending so much of the first hour on her might not have been the best use of time. Just generally speaking, I felt that the first episode didn't have its footing in terms of trying to introduce all of the ideas that they wanted to. The second episode gets much better. I actually think some of the things that they introduced in the second episode should have been introduced in the first episode. But that's also me, the editor, talking and, understanding that they are juggling so many characters in so many realms and introducing so many things that, I understand off the bat because I know the history, but not everybody does. So yeah, that's kind of like where I was landing in general. But, I do think that the feel is close to right. Like they're almost there, and I am not going to, shut the door yet, because I do know that where we're going could still be very interesting, and I think they'll find their footing a little bit more.
You're not leaving our breakfast table. I like that. Nope. I like that. What do you, the choice to focus on Galadriel in the first episode a lot? I mean, that's a great question. I have to kick back to you there, because I came out of that episode kind of feeling as though she's positioned in the number one chair, so to speak, on this show. It's not necessarily going to be how it goes in the end. You got some big players here. Elrond himself is got a lot to do in this world going forward still. So we're in a lot of characters that are show only now, right? We're seeing a lot of creations for the show. So yeah, curious about your takes on that. About what else would have slid into the spotlight a little bit more along with her in episode 1?
I think I would have gotten to Celebrimbor faster. And
I don't like that guy.
He's a clown.
The scene between Celebrimbor and Elrond in Eregion in the beginning of the second episode has so much more to do with what this series is about that I was surprised it came in the second episode. And I just felt like the juxtaposition of a Gil-galad, a Galadriel, a Elrond, and a Celebrimbor, and then Arondir to a certain extent too. The show was attempting to do what I wanted it to do, which was show the differences amongst the elves. Yeah. They're playing a little fast and loose, basically saying that Gil-galad is High King over everybody, which is not necessarily the case. Arondir is a Sylvan elf. There's a difference there and everything else. But I was hoping we would see the differences of the different houses of elves and the different backgrounds. I mean, in one of those little lore things, like, Galadriel outranks Gil-galad by a lot in the books. And this has flipped that script, which I find interesting. But I think I understand the adaptation and the idea of trying to take her character from this single visioned, one focus, revenge at the cost of all else, to becoming somebody that is more of a leader, who is a little more nuanced, who understands that there's more to this world. I do see that that's what we're doing. But what I felt in the first episode was that she's one note through the whole thing. You get it. You get what she's doing. She has that good conversation with her and Elrond about the how come I don't feel it in here. But I feel like that could have come maybe a little earlier. You could have had scenes combined. You could have gotten what you got across about her without that much time spent on her, because she is very one-dimensional that whole time. She's very cold, very almost unlikable. Like, I didn't find myself like drawn to her quite yet. It's it just, there was something, there was not any warmth. There wasn't enough warmth, I should say, and there wasn't enough like context. Because I like her elves, her expedition party, like refusing to follow her. I feel like they could have done that a little bit better, in terms of why wouldn't they? If they were young elves, if they had been born in Middle Earth, had not known the War of Wrath, then that little tidbit would have helped explain why they wouldn't have continued with her. But if they were elves of the First Age like she was, they would have gone to the ends of the earth and dug their nails in like she was, because the War of the Wrath was bigger than her brother. Like, what it did to the elves cannot be stated. It introduced them to the idea of death, which is huge, especially to immortal beings. And I feel like the gravitas and the feeling of all of that wasn't landing as hard as I think it should have. And if it had, it would have helped explain where she's coming from versus Elrond, who was born in Middle Earth. He's never seen Valinor. Gil-galad has never seen Valinor. He was born there. Arondir. So there is a disconnect in a way. And I don't think that was spelled out as much as I wish that it had. But, again, I think some tidbits could come out later that could help with that. Like they're not going to reveal everything. Like, there's stuff about Elrond, like specifically about his background and what he is. Like, they say he's not a High Lord.
Yeah, you can't come to the meeting. because it's elf lords only. I thought that was so interesting because I was like, oh, is this a, I don't want to spoil things, but is this a race thing? Is this a,
exactly?
What's going on?
It's a division within the elves, and he is a Peredhel, which again, I don't know if they can use the word in this, but they can explain what his background is. And I think they're waiting to do that. And that will help inform all the stuff that we're seeing of him. Somebody who has to rely on his wits and his intelligence to make himself useful. And the fact that Gil-galad has him as his herald, which is an important position, but not a super high position. And seeing Elrond find ways to, get his way up there because he would be a good leader. This is about both him and Galadriel turning into the leaders we know that they become in the Third Age in the Lord of the Rings. And I think that Elrond's journey through these first 2 episodes makes that clearer than hers. Hers is very until she jumps off the boat and meets Halbrand and all of that. Then you start to see, okay, maybe I just wish that had come sooner.
Right. It almost makes me wonder, as you were saying all that, which was like so beautifully said, and now I want the Rachel Cushing Levine commentary series on the episodes as they come out, and then that's what I want the next day. But the idea that she outranks Gil-galad in the books, and how that, and like you said, by a ton, by an age,
thousands of years older.
Yeah, like seeing
and
things
from a royal house. So
fathom, It almost makes me wonder if the point that they want to make, and this will be on the scripts for later to do or not do, is you could have been in Gil-galad's spot if you weren't single. You forsook your right as queen or whatever. So who knows what they'll do there, but yeah, I love what you were saying about the difference between Elrond and Galadriel and their approaches, because I think I maybe was more drawn to her in this one than you were, but that's with a different frame of reference, of course. So I loved the selective warmth, with the way that she does change when she's with Elrond and how he can break through that. I thought was really effective, and I think that the overall point that I'm getting to is that I think that this cast is just so money across both of them, original characters and new characters. I think that the dinner scene in episode 2 of Elrond and Durin and Disa and their 2 kids,
2 episodes
is that's a scene
with Durin and Disa and Elrond was exactly what I wanted this show to be.
It's so beautiful. It's so like the same reason why I know I fell in love with the Fellowship or with Thorin's company is because there's dynamics that are just human dynamics no matter what species they are, and the idea of all of this pomp and circumstance and this big tradition and this test and all of this stuff and this shaming you in front of all the other dwarves is because you hurt my feelings. Like that's really what it is. I thought we were bros, and I thought that was so relatable. I found this to be a very relatable show, which contrasted well with how inaccessible it maybe could have been. So Ken's dead now, so I'm just going to he's Valinor. Ken mid conversation was like, you know what, I hear the call, I'm leaving. But yeah, so I think that was some of the most effective stuff in the entire thing, was sort of those interpersonal dynamics, and with something like Arondir and Bronwyn, which is original material, and Arondir like being a whole cloth character, but still filling a role. Like, to my understanding, and you can correct me and fill this in, there was the whole let's keep an eye on the people that followed Morgoth and their descendants, but there wasn't a eyes in character for that until now.
Yeah, I mean, the Second Age is thousands of years long, and like I said, in the appendices, it's like 3 pages. And it's just a bullet point of dates, essentially. So, but we do know that, most men followed Morgoth in the First Age. The 3 Edain houses didn't. They were elf friends, and they're the ultimate, ancestors to Aragorn and the Dunedain and everything else. But most didn't. And so the show, rightly in my mind, has to show that side of things. And now that Sauron has been out of action or missing for so many years, what do those people what are they doing? What are they exhibiting? Like, are there hangers-ons? Are they still remembering? Are they, evolving and getting better? Like, because Bronwyn seems like a good person, a good-hearted person, and some of the other villagers do too. So I think that having that perspective is very important. Again, one of the things that Tolkien did and that the show is attempting to do is show the different, it's not just a race of men. There are different groups. And when we meet the Númenóreans, you're going to see the contrast. And then there's different groups of elves. And at certain times there were dwarves too. But so the idea is to juxtapose all of these things. And I think that showing Bronwyn's village and showing, the undercurrents of the evil that Morgoth wrought for those people. I mean, he did it out of fear. He scared them into following him, and he tortured them and everything else and lied to them. So, to have that undercurrent, and then the literal, it's burrowing underneath their villages.
Or and under the farmhouse is is this a Morgul blade? Is it a proto Morgul blade of some kind? Because they don't have the 9 yet, but it's the the idea of every storyline here. What fascinated me is that every storyline is united by the common theme of, do you have the capacity for change? And that's present in Galadriel's, present in the entire Elven arcs of storylines, that whole grouping, the Harfoot grouping, the human grouping, and in the Harfoots, in the human grouping, you have people like Bronwyn that are they're made uncomfortable and sad by the fact that what she says, there are good people in that town, we had nothing to do with that. There are people that are made angry by the fact that they are being still watched, and then there are people that possibly still follow ? Because we know that this thing was under the farm. So it's how do we take one droplet of a thing from the past and see every reaction to that thing? And even in Harfoots, another storyline which is filled with original characters, like Nori, we get to see they're reacting to the world around them, and that's their whole existence, is reacting to the world around them. And how they get to move in and out.
They're driven by the fact that they don't interfere with the world around them. They stay on their trail, and they have each other and everything else. But much that's not only are they the ancestors to the hobbits, but that's a direct through line for the way that they view the world, which is, we have our stuff. We focus on each other. We have each other's backs. We love the land. We love, the nature and camaraderie and friendship and all the simple things in life. So it's drawing direct parallels. And, I think that some of it works and some of it isn't quite there yet. But again, I just feel like you have to do so much in 1-2 hours to make all of these things land. And the charm of Hobbiton, the first time you see it in Fellowship of the Ring, and the hobbits and the music and everything else, I didn't quite feel it with the Harfoots, but the more I got to know Nori, the more I was feeling it and understanding it and everything else. And it's high fantasy, whether you like it or not. All of this is. And so there are archetypes. And Tolkien is honestly the father of fantasy. So in some ways he created the archetypes, but also he was undermining his own ideas all the time. So, this show is, again, trying to find the balance of that. And that's why I struggled a little bit with Galadriel, because it seemed one note, revenge. Right out of the gate. And there wasn't as much nuance, especially, again, me knowing what exists in the books, but again, not knowing if they can play it or not.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder almost if somebody, I know the whole, let's release 2, or with Andor, let's release 3 is a business move for retention stats and things like that. But
my guess is, I think
they were this is a 2-part pilot.
They realized that, for the first episode on its own, I mean, pretty much most people that I have talked to have been some were good. I didn't hear anybody who say it was super great and amazing and exactly everything that they wanted. I'm not saying that they're not out there, but in my circles and people that, I know that love Tolkien and everything else, but it was the second episode that really grabbed a lot of people, I think. Because some of the ideas in episode 2 were the ideas of the show. Again, the fact that we didn't meet Celebrimbor or talk about Feanor until the second episode was strange to me. But again, that's because I know what I know. So yeah, it'll be interesting. But at the same time, like I said, like there is so much promise that I saw in the first 2 episodes that makes me feel like there is a lot more to explore. And now that even if they kind of didn't do a great job assembling the foundation, it's assembled. We get it. Like Sauron's on the move back. Certain people saw it coming, others didn't. They're about to get surprised. Like, how do we all come together with that in mind, especially with everybody's individual baggages? Halbrand is a new character. Clearly, I'm assuming he's a man from one of those Southland villages that went bad in some way, shape, or form, and he blames himself or something happened, and he's sort of a little bit on the run with that. So he's got his baggage, Galadriel's got her baggage, so I feel like their story is going to be interesting in that way. The Harfoots, do we get involved in the world? Like, what is the deal with the stranger? There is a lot there that I'm like very interested to come
Rachel,
back to.
Is it Gandalf or not, Rachel? Rachel, you're here to tell us who he is. No,
I'm fairly certain it's a Maya, which, if for the non-lore heads, it is in the appendices enough that they could include this, I believe. Valinor is ruled over by 2 sets of deities, or angels, some people call them, the Valar and the Mayar. The Valar are a lot more powerful and overseeing. The Mayar are just a little bit less powerful. Sauron was originally a Maya. All the wizards, Saruman, the Blue Wizards, Radagast, Gandalf, they were all Maya, sent to Middle-earth in human form. The thing is, they're not sent to Middle-earth until the Third Age. This is the Second Age. So people are sort of debating if they're going to find a way around that.
That becomes the condensing issue of, like, they threw around that vague condensing setup.
Right, but that's different ages. I don't know if they can do
that's
that.
Huge.
They're definitely condensing the Second Age by far. That is very clear to those of us that know the timetable. But the Balrogs were Maya before they were corrupted by Morgoth.
And they led with that in the trailer. They were like, we're going there.
That is very
enjoy Khazad-dûm as it is now.
That's actually kind of my favorite theory. Although that, again, the timeline's not quite right, is that the stranger will become the Balrog that ultimately decimates Khazad-dûm. Oops, excuse me, my mic went down.
That would be so heartbreaking.
It definitely would.
With Nori, oh my god, that would be terrible. I was talking about with a few friends last night. Lots of Gandalf, lots of Saruman, because he would have been the senior, and lots of stuff like that. And then it dawned on me that they could take a Hail Mary that would be like a 20-year payoff to the Jackson days, and would probably piss a lot of people off, but also might intrigue people. Is the stranger Tom Bombadil?
Okay, that was one of the first things that hit my head. I'm not even like, I saw like how big he was and the beard and everything else. And I know most people, movie lovers, probably went Gandalf. My mind immediately went Tom Bombadil.
It was hard to not go Gandalf, especially talking to insects. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, too far down. And then I was texting a buddy of mine named Goose from the Try It Out of the Force podcast, and I said to him, could it be Tom? Because he's got famously the most ambiguous origins, famously been around an ambiguous amount of time. I mean, I know he's supposed to be a first age guy, loosely, of possibly the first ever man.
Right.
But, if they bump that up a little bit into the second, that would be a less drastic thing than pulling a wizard back in the timeline. And it's like he's in the right area where Tom will eventually kind of settle, like Shire adjacent. And so that was just an interesting thing. Like, you have somebody that is probably like the biggest iconic character that is also in the blank slate category of being able to mess with. So
yeah, I'm actually really excited about it, because this is definitively an area where it could theoretically be any of these things. And that's going to be kind of a lot of fun to talk about amongst loreheads and non, just the idea, because basically for the story, it represents change. As Ken was saying, that is a massive theme in the episode, and is, can people change? Will people change, as you were saying? And the idea of, should you change?
absolutely. Should you? Where a lot of the elders are Well,
a saying
absolutely not.
no. Yeah.
And that's a
And
big
that's
complacency point too.
absolutely 100%. So it's like I keep saying, I really think that there's a really great foundation here, and I'm really curious and mostly excited to see where it goes in that regard. But what, so as you know, you sound like you know some lore.
Some, yeah.
But in terms of other characters, obviously I think we both loved Elrond. Who
Loved
else popped for you in the sense of excited to see where they go next?
I am, and we already alluded to her. I am not just like enthused by Disa. I love this woman. I want to be her roommate. Like I think that she is so, and she's entirely original, right? There
Yes.
is there even a vague princess that's alluded to? Not at all. So yeah. So as far as an original creation, that like, yeah, of course a prince would have a princess. Cool. Like just do that.
Yeah.
Her ability to resonate, it's resonation that she talks about, resonating with the rocks and the oars and all that.
Yeah.
That conversation as a metaphor for listening and intuition and oneness with the world, which is so classically this mythology of listening to the actual realm around you, and we see a lot of that represented in different storylines, like the Harfoot storyline. But her ability to convey that in that conversation with Elrond, that all ends on that beat of love. Of, well, you know, in a house like this, in a house such as yours, and everything, and the comedy there, that was great comedy, which I think is a strength of both trilogies and now this show and the 77 movie. Like Lord of the Rings is when funny, it's like legit funny and in a really powerful way. And so I thought Disa was a standout debut for sure.
Yeah. I think it stands in contrast to some of the Harfoot stuff, which I think they were striving for a similar balance, but wasn't always landing. But it was landing, like, for me, this entire sequence, the character development is there without you having to just exposition it out to everybody. The balance of heart and humor and drama is there. The allusions, the metaphors are there. Like, everything about that scene makes me hope for moving forward, because I think it worked so well in that sense. You learn about these characters without them just spelling things out. And I love the idea that because Durin doesn't live as long as Elrond does, Elrond didn't even think that that long, that 20 years is it's nothing. And to Doran is like, you stupid elf, like, don't think like that, you know?
Yeah.
And that to me is the important, like, that's the subtlety. The idea that the elves are immortal means they view things differently. But if they're going to be a part of Middle Earth, they have to come to understand the other races around them. Right. But it's hard for them to do that because most of those races don't like them, because generally speaking, they're a little elitist, they're a little exclusionist,
uppity from time to time.
Yeah. You know, so like that's the give and take. And that's important to put out there now, like the villagers disliking the elves so much because of their history and because of the narrow vision and view that a lot of them have. They're gonna have to put that aside when Sauron comes back. Will they put it aside? Will they follow him? Will they make a different choice? Will they change? Having all of these divisions is important, because as the first two episodes basically, you know, hammered down, was Sauron's coming. Sauron's coming. I mean, like, Galadriel's right. They were making sure we understood that, like, this is where we're going.
And in every storyline too, like even Theo, Bronwyn's son, has his encounter with the Eye of Sauron, and black speech is coming through the ambient sound and everything, and having that all there. And will they be able to come together? And if there is somebody out there that this is their first Lord of the Rings thing, period. And so for them, they have no knowledge of the fact of what the Last Alliance will be and things like that way down the road. But it's interesting to see some of these players. So before I get into that next point, I just want to say, Ken is Boromir right now. He was there at the start of the journey. He just went out, but we're going to keep on going. He did have some technical issues. I just wanted to address that for video and podcast listeners. We're going to keep going for 11, 12 minutes more talking about this, but Ken is like here in spirit. I just want everybody that's listening on podcast especially to not wonder, did he fall asleep? Did he get muted? No, he's okay. Just a technical thing.
He's having a second breakfast, which honestly, I can't blame him.
Second breakfast. He absolutely. Ken would live a great Shire life for sure.
I'll agree.
Now, Disa's original, Arondir and Bronwyn are original, and we talked about some of your complicated feelings on this portrayal of Galadriel, which, you know, was nuanced, of course. I don't want anyone's takeaway to be like, Rachel didn't like Galadriel.
That's not
true.
Yeah. Some people are going to take that away from it. Whatever. Yeah. I'm not interested in those people.
Can't control those people. Yeah. No. Not true. It's a nuanced take, but I am curious. Looking at Elrond, Gil-galad, people that are major players that were adapted into this, Durin, who stuck out to you as like, wow, that's the closest to either what I wanted or what I expected, or that feels really right in terms of any texts that they might be relevant to?
Yeah, no, for sure. Elrond is, I think Robert Aramayo is killing it. I see it. I see the young Hugo Weaving in him, and see I can see trace the line in my mind from his portrayal to the Elrond we know. And again, because I do know some of the lore, like I understand the things that he has ahead of him, and I also understand his background, and these things will eventually play a part in the show. So I don't want to say anything too specific for people that don't know that, but I'm very excited because it felt the closest to what I had sort of expected. I've been on podcasts before, and like honestly, like Galadriel and Eowyn and Faramir, like those are my favorite Tolkien characters. However, the most interesting Tolkien character from his background all the way to his end is Elrond. Like there's, in my mind, the stuff in the First Age that leads up to his birth, who his parents are, how he got to be where he is, his brother. I won't go into more detail than that. All of these things make him such a complicated and interesting character. And I really feel like the show is going to lean into that and explore that as he comes into his own. That by far was the best. I was also, even though we didn't see a lot of him, was impressed with Celebrimbor because, again, I'll just say it, I'm not sure if they're allowed to say it because of First Age, Second Age, Silmarillion stuff, but Celebrimbor is the grandson, I believe it's the grandson of Feanor, the man he was talking about.
Oh, so that's his by familial right.
That is his family. And again, what they probably can't go too deep into is that Feanor and his sons actually committed some pretty atrocious crimes against other elves, all in the name of an oath to recover the Silmarils from Morgoth at all costs. So there is a dark background to Celebrimbor, and his family has this ambition to create beautiful things and be a part of nature, and that's all very elvish, but they have tended to take it too far in the past. And so the question is, will Celebrimbor continue to do that or not? And I felt that in his speech when he was talking.
Oh, there's a lot of an air of hubris coming through.
And an air of, I want to make my mark. My forefather created Silmarils that almost won over Morgoth. They were so beautiful. They were so special. If he could do that, what can I do? Like that to me, that whole conversation was another one of my favorite parts of the show. Really, I think is setting the stage in a really great way where I think people are going to like him, and people in the books and what people did. He was a natural leader. People were drawn to him. His group of elves, they were called the Noldor. I don't know, again, if they include it. I got to stop saying that.
Right. No. I mean, it's a valid point.
That group of elves were closest to the dwarves because they liked creating things. So that speech Disa gives is actually something Celebrimbor would very much understand, versus some of the other high elves that are much more attuned to nature in the green sense versus like the rock sense, if you want to boil it down. And so they don't really understand each other. So that's a division within the elves. And that's,
which I thought was really compelling, even if you're coming into this fresh, or if you're coming into this just as a fan of the two movie trilogies. Somebody will be able to say, oh, he's more akin to my Legolas, Tauriel, Thranduil, and this is more akin to these people. And what I love about the Celebrimbor stuff is that it plays with it's one of those like successful moments of double intrigue. If you're just watching this cold, you're like, that's a little bit self-centered as opposed to some of the other elves that we're seeing, even not even in a malicious way, but it's a self-serving goal, my legacy, my mark, my print on this world, versus somebody like Gil-galad, which is, while we might condemn his choice because we're endeared to Galadriel and his actions of trying to maneuver her off the board, we also see that as a realm choice and not a personal choice, at least in this context. And so it's an interesting sort of line to draw between them. And with Elrond, one thing that I adored about what they've included and sort of, again, double intrigue of like how any bit of extra knowledge might change something. So if you do have a little bit of that Elrond backstory in your mind, you not only did his immortality affect his perception of time and his friendship with Durin, we know the nature of his immortality, how he got it, how it was a choice, and how there's certain it's the drawbacks of choice, and I think which is a huge thing, of course, in any of these good and evil tales. Now, before we start to wind down, just want to make sure that we hit everything. How are you feeling about some of the introductions of different, like mechanically locations using our map? This, again, not comparing it to A Song of Ice and Fire shows, GOT and House of the Dragon, but it is also doing that. The story is not in the travel time. Let's go here. Let's go here. Khazad-dûm's close, but it isn't a 20-minute drive close. So how did you feel about the way that we flowed from area to area to story?
Again, I think it was a little bit choppy in episode 1, got better in episode 2. I do like the map touch. I think that, Game of Thrones did it with the opening credits, and I've always thought that was a great way to do it for a fantasy series, because people aren't naturally like, you say somebody traveled from New York to California in a movie. Well, most people have a genuine idea what that means. In a fantasy world, it's harder to. So I liked the map, and I liked the idea that we're going to the different corners of Middle Earth and showing how different they are, because again, we're all talking about whether or not they'll be able to come together with the inevitable rise of a new Dark Lord. So I think that generally speaking, the look of the different areas was great, and moving through them was well done. I just think the editing choices sometimes, like staying too long in one place and versus another, just the writing and the flow was harder.
There's a couple jumps that are a little bit, actually, while watching it, and it was a Galadriel scene, so it extra made me think of you, but it made me think of you as an award-nominated editor. There's one edit that I watched maybe 6 times because it puzzled me so much, which is from the killing of the snow troll to then the meeting that happens right after. I was like, are we in the same spot? What's going on? Is the troll body's not there, but her sword is sheathed, so a few minutes maybe? Did they drag the body out? Some things like that where you're like,
sometimes that's
we're getting in, trying to roll. But the thing about it is, we talked about the spiritual 2-part pilot that this really is. Honestly, I mean, unlike Game of Thrones, and this will be one of the only moments of comparison in good faith, that's not a knock on either, is that Game of Thrones, when that started, out of the gate, at least for the storylines that you were going to see that season, got them all in that pilot. We saw Essos, we saw the North, we saw everything that was going to be relevant. Even if we didn't see the wall, we had Benjen come in. And so it was all of those elements that like complete board setting. We're on now going into the 3rd, and we're just now going to see a Númenórean with that tease at the end of the ship that's going to rescue Galadriel and Halbrand. So it's almost like, I'm not going to say like it's a 3-part pilot, but it is going to take its time and breathe, which is an interesting and refreshing thing, I think, for this. Not that the movies don't breathe. They are famously long. I don't know if everybody remembers, but they can't just have a dinner conversation in the thick of it, because that's not what the Fellowship story is. It's an on-the-move story. And as much as we stop is like establishing new locations, like Edoras, and like having to show that is maybe as much as we slow in that. But here, being able to say, no, we're going to stop for dinner, no, we're going to stop for somebody to talk about their work, to show their plans, those are I think special moments that are appreciated for sure.
Yeah, I think introducing the Numenorians now is right, because I keep using the word, there's a juxtaposition always happening. And so we've seen the way men live in Middle Earth, and we've seen a couple different elvish cultures, and we've seen dwarves, and we've seen harfoots. What now we're going to see the height of the realm of men. The three Edain families were gifted this island and what they created with it, and it's going to be in sharp contrast to the villages and the type of men we've already seen.
So, or to the third age that people have known pop culturally. Right. I mean, it's your Rome comparison. There's been a lot of like, people see the pictures of the scale mail that the Numenorians have and different things, and there's been some criticism of, oh, that doesn't feel like my Rohan, my Gondor, my things I know. But the thing is, it shouldn't. It shouldn't at all. It's an island nation. It's supposed to be of a different time. So I'm really, really excited about that, and I'm excited to see sort of, I mean, the men that would inform, because again, it's not a prequel to the Jackson trilogy, but it is a prequel to that mythological period. So it's like we see Halbrand, who's this guy on the run from darkness, where you could make the argument that Aragorn is a guy on the run from light, from destiny. There's an inverse there. And now if you're one of those people that loves the extended editions where you get to find out about Aragorn's age, you're about to see the people that give him that ability, to live that long, to have some of those traits. So before we wind down, is there anything big or major that we haven't touched on, or small that we haven't touched on, that is really exciting to you?
I was curious. I know one of the characters that doesn't seem to be hitting with a lot of people is Arondir at this point.
Oh, interesting.
And one of the things that is always, not, I say always, like there's been a bunch of adaptations, there hasn't, but can potentially be full of difficulty for adaptations, is the elves are not human. So sometimes in the stories they try to like have them have human emotion, which they do, but to call it human emotion, it's elvish emotion. Like what they are often thought of as very staid and very emotionless. That doesn't translate well in visual storytelling, I don't think. I think that people see this, and that's what a lot of what Galadriel was doing. She did drop it when she was with Elrond, like you said, and those were moments where you find that you think that there are more layers. I haven't found Arondir has done that yet, and I feel like people are just not getting the why of him yet.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because I will say I effing love Arondir. And so I'm interested that people are saying that, not in a bad way. I mean, they can dislike him or they can be trepidatious. That's totally fine. He's a new character. But what I loved about it is, like you're saying, like the Elvis emotions. Famously, most people in the world's frame of reference for an elf is Legolas, and how it's that 3-movie arc of getting to the point of cracking a smile, having a friendship.
Yeah, like that. That's as far as he goes.
That's as what about side by side with a friend is a huge thing.
That's character growth.
That's that admission. With Arondir, we can see the torturedness of this thing with Bronwyn that they can't be public about, even though the other elves know, even though it's a rumor in the town. He can't just come in and yeah, exactly. He can't actually, and there's the precedents they allude to these older tales that
it's only been 2 elf females who've married elf human men, and
neither of them ended.
I mean, I don't want to give away too much history.
No, for sure.
But generally speaking, it's and honestly, just logic says, how would that work? Because one is immortal, the other one's going to die. You fall in love, you're going to see the person that you love die. Because
and it's like not to get into like weird logistical timeline questions, but he's been watching her area for 79 years. He's probably witnessed her entire existence. So that's, unless he just missed her running around in the fields as a kid. But he's been there. And what I liked about him, to put it in the terms of another fantasy franchise, is that Arondir is a Jedi. That was my big takeaway from him right off the bat, is that he's on guard. He's dutiful. He is taking orders from a council of sorts. In this case, it's a king, but he is wrestling with emotions and duty. He's wrestling with my place and what I've sworn to do and what I am and what wasn't decided for me, in the same way that a Jedi is roped into it as a child, and how that sort of evolves into their role. And so I loved seeing his sort of battle with finally making the choice of, I've been called away to leave, but I'm going to be the one that dives in. Sometimes you have to defy something greater, in this case the orders of Gil-galad, and Gil-galad saying, we have peace, there's nothing wrong here, we have peace, stop asking questions. Which was, he's already become a very meme worthy character. Yes. For those reasons, and I thought that was really interesting. So unless there's anything that you want to throw in, do you want to let everybody know?
Yeah, I feel like we said it all. Like, it's not perfect. Yeah. And I don't think for necessarily for lore heads or for just straight up watchers, but they got a lot right. And I am very hopeful for where they go from here. I think that these actors will have lived in these characters a little bit more. I hope the writing gets maybe slightly more nuanced, in the vein of more scenes along the lines of the dinner in Khazad-dûm. And I feel like even though it was a rough start, the pieces are set, and I'm encouraged to see how it goes from here. Not a home run, but still, there's just, I mean, we're back in Middle Earth, and I can't not be big. Very, very excited about that, and excited to see more of Tolkien's ideas brought to life, and maybe differently than he initially thought, but still in the same thematic, important ways. The reasons he was writing about these characters, the core is still what he wanted. I can't be mad at the end of the day that they decided to make Galadriel like a badass commander of armies. Like, maybe not quite true to the book, but at the same time, can't hate it.
It's like, stands to reason that could have happened, and that's the, to put her in that active role, that transition to the Lady of Lorien that we'll see later on.
Excited to see that transition. I think that's what this series is going to do.
It's very, very exciting, and I agree with so much of that, and I'm so excited to be back. It's a feeling we haven't had since Unexpected Journey. It's a feeling that I've been missing, and I'm a prequels kid in a Star Wars sense, so I will always be endeared to the idea of a prequel because I've seen them get unfair hate. I have also lived through things like Crimes of Grindelwald, so sometimes it's not unfair. But why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the internet talking about this, and where they can direct their well-reasoned and kind questions at you about lore.
Please reach out Twitter or Instagram at Rachel Cushing Levine, all one word. I'm a Tolkien geek, y'all know that, and I'm excited to keep chatting about this whole world in this new show.
Absolutely. And as for me, you can find me personally at that Alden Diaz, ThatAlden Diaz, talking Star Wars on Octa Radio here at Casterly Talk, covering House of the Dragon, covering the Rings of Power as they go. Rachel will, of course, be back. Bonus points if you send her your questions in Elvish. I'm sure she can read it. Ken is over in Valinor right now, enjoying his forever retirement. So he's gone forever. You're never going to see him again. So we hope you enjoyed Casterly Talk, because it's my show now. I'm Sauron. I'm kidding. We love Ken, and he will be back eventually. But for right now, we're going to close things out. Everybody, be as kind as Disa is to her dinner guests, and we'll catch you next time.